Tonight on Primetime, US forces seize an Iranian-linked vessel in the Gulf, raising tensions as fragile diplomacy hangs in the balance. Tehran casts doubt over the talks, warning of a response, while Washington signals it's ready to push ahead. So, are we close to agreement or close to collapse? Well, good evening. Tensions in the Gulf are escalating further after a US operation at sea targets an Iranian-linked vessel. Well, the move comes amid a fragile standoff with diplomacy under strain and the risk of further confrontation growing.
US military has taken control of an Iranian-flagged cargo ship after stopping it at sea. In a social media post, President Donald Trump said US forces disabled the vessel by blowing a hole in its engine room and now have full custody of the ship. The US Central Command later confirmed the operation and released video of the encounter. It said a US Navy destroyer, USS Spruance, intercepted the vessel, identified as the MV Tauska, in the North Arabian Sea. According to CENTCOM, the ship's crew failed to respond to repeated warnings over a 6-hour period. The destroyer then fired several rounds from its 5-inch deck gun into the vessel's engine room to stop it. US Marines later boarded the ship, which remains in American custody. Tracking data shows the ship had traveled from Port Klang in Malaysia and was heading toward the Iranian port of Bandar Abbas. The interception took place near key shipping lanes that connect to the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most important routes for oil transport. The incident comes during a period of heightened tension in the region. The United States has maintained a blockade on Iranian ports, while Iran has at times restricted traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. At the same time, diplomatic efforts appear to be faltering. The Islamic Republic news agency reports that Iran has rejected taking part in a second round of talks with the United States. The decision follows warnings from Washington that new strikes could be considered if a deal is not reached. President Trump said US representatives are expected to travel to Islamabad for proposed talks, describing the American offer as fair. However, Iran's refusal raises doubts about whether negotiations will move forward.
Well, as we heard there, uncertainty is still growing around proposed talks between the United States and Iran as Tehran disputes reports of a new round of negotiations. With tensions still high and warnings continuing, questions remain over whether diplomatic efforts can move forward.
Iran has rejected as inaccurate announcements by the US officials as well as news reports about the date of upcoming round of negotiations on Tuesday in Pakistan, according to a state-owned IRNA news agency. On the eve of the reportedly scheduled talks, President Masoud Pezeshkian held a phone contact with Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif on Sunday. They exchanged views on the latest regional developments, Islamabad negotiations, and developments related to the ceasefire, President's office reported. President Pezeshkian stated the US is after repeating the past patterns and betraying the diplomacy, referring to the US-Israeli war on Iran last June and February this year in the middle of negotiations. Also, Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi held a phone call with his Pakistani counterpart, Mohammad Ishaqdar, about regional developments and ongoing fragile ceasefire, the ministry announced in a press release. He expressed appreciation for Pakistan's good officers and mediation efforts, but cited the bitter experience over the past year marked by repeated breaches of trust by Washington. Over the weekend, Parliament Speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, in an interview with the state IRIB TV, termed Tehran's 10-point plan as non-negotiable principles for the Iranian armed forces and diplomats. Ghalibaf led Iran's negotiators in the inconclusive talks with the US in Islamabad earlier this month. In the latest development, Iran's Khatam al-Anbiya central headquarters warned on Monday that it will soon respond to the armed maritime piracy after the US Navy fired on an Iranian cargo ship in the Gulf of Oman on Sunday. Turaj Shiralilu, Tehran, for AnewZ.
Okay, for more on this, we're joined by our Deputy Editor-in-Chief, Orkan Amashov. Orkan, good to have you with us in the studio as always. JD Vance en route to Islamabad. Iran sending mixed signals about whether it will engage. This is bamboozling many analysts, not you, I imagine.
Oh, me too.
What do you make of what's going on at the moment?
Well, it's very difficult to say with any degree of certainty what's happening. If to use the language employed by George W. Bush back in 2002, regarding Iraq war back then, that was just before the war in Iraq in 2003. He described what was happening as a rerun of a bad movie. This one actually it could be described in using the similar language. We know that on Wednesday, the current deal, interim ceasefire deal agreed between United States and Iran via Pakistan, is expiring, is coming to an end. And will it continue? What will happen later? Well, the reality is that US and Iran do not talk to each other directly, and Pakistan acting as a mediator. We're not talking about the establishment of permanent peace in the Middle East. That's not going to happen anytime soon, as long as the fundamental ideological, the crux of the system there in Iran is in place, with the destruction of the Jewish state still being actively propagated, with the nuclear ambitions are being still there. I don't necessarily think that we can talk about peace. What we can talk about, interim solution, which will look like a ceasefire deal with a certain period being attached to one of the clauses of the deal, and then we will be sort of geopolitically plodding further. And my feeling is that it will be the continuation of the self-same, basically. Iran talks about non-negotiable 10-point plan. Nothing is non-negotiable in diplomacy. We have seen many Iranian red lines. They were saying that the killing, the physical extermination of their supreme leader or other high-ranking officials would be tantamount to red lines, but they do not tantamount to red lines. Iran is still functioning, and even former Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif talked about the necessity of extending olive branch to the other side. We found ourselves in the midst of a very complicated situation, and I think in one word it looks like a double blockade. Iran is effectively applying this regime of selective approach towards vessels. Friendly vessels are being allowed to pass through the strait with some degree of financial mechanism being applied to them. Sort of they're being forced to pay a certain amount of money in order to be able to pass. And the United States also applying a naval blockade against those ships which are docking at and departing from Iranian ports, and plus Iranian approved vessels. So effectively it's a battle for the control of the strait. And I don't think it will end anytime soon. I expect something in the shape of an extended ceasefire being declared probably on Wednesday, but I don't expect anything which will look like a permanent peace or anything of the similar ilk.
And again, what about this sense from the Iranians, the sort of casting doubt on the talks? Should we read anything into that?
Well, we should read much into that. Iranians are effectively trying to put on a brave face. They're effectively saying that they will not be cowed into submission because their nuclear ambitions are part of their national ideology. Clearly, this entire conversation, there are many aspects to what's happening there. There are those who are conspiratorially minded who would say that it's all about oil prices. It has been all along the process, right at the beginning of the process, it has been about the oil prices. I don't subscribe to that point of view, but really Iran constitutes a danger to many of its neighbors, including the State of Israel, and Iran does not want to relinquish its nuclear ambitions. And this fundamental conversation about the necessity of transferring all the enriched uranium to the United States is one of the key sticking points. And Iran is showing a degree of character. I think everybody has been in the habit of commenting on what's happening regarding this Iran war over the past few weeks and months. But I think currently Iran has survived, the system there survived. They can declare victory. They even declared the last ceasefire deal as victory, and the United States did the same, of course. What does victory mean? How does victory look like for Iran? The fact that they have not been forced to complete surrender. Their nuclear capabilities, their missile, ballistic infrastructure has been debilitated and probably raised to the ground to a certain extent, but they're still capable of resisting. That means victory. So victory for Iran does not mean actually defeating US and Israel. It means surviving. A mere survival in itself, victory. For the United States, the demands are high, of course. They need to achieve definable and discernible military objective, which they have not yet, as we see.
It's interesting that point you make about both sides declaring victory. In a way, there are striking similarities between the two, aren't there? They both used mixed signals as diplomatic tools, strategies. Iran, we know, has used that approach for many years, but the Trump administration does something similar.
You're absolutely right, Guy. U.S. administration, current administration, is doing something very similar. As long as Iran is concerned, it's the most natural thing in the world for Iranian establishment to use this apparatus, this methodology of sending mixed signals as a survival mode. We have seen it in the context of Nakhchivan Airport strike. Pezeshkian, foreign minister, and others were talking about peace and diplomacy. IRGC commanders were more forceful, talking about retaliation and so forth. This is a modus operandi of the Iranian system there, sending mixed signals, diplomacy if needed, then strong language if you want to force other side into submission, and etc. For United States, it's not very characteristic for United States leadership to use this sort of language. I mean, President Donald Trump has been the acme of mixed signals 2 weeks ago, when initially he said that one civilization would die, and then he said that this is the greatest day in the history of the Middle East. Clearly, what we observe, to achieve the purposes of effectively denuclearizing, effectively depriving United States of Iran of nuclear ambitions, is something which is yet to be attained, and a lot is to be done in that particular respect. And I think from this sort of mixed signals being sent by the United States, there is a need for some consolidated point of view, because it must be made very clear: is Iran danger to the United States now? I don't think Iran was danger to the United States at the beginning of this campaign. It was most certainly danger to Israel. And the question here is that, will the United States and President Donald Trump be able to balance its realistic ambitions with the possible, discernible, practicable objectives? And in that particular regard, I think the world at large at a loss to understand what US actually wants now.
What about Pakistan in all of this? Because if these mixed signals are hard for analysts to track, in a sense it must be even harder for mediators like Pakistan to try and cement in meaningful progress amidst all the rhetoric. How have they performed as a mediator, and what do you think they will be thinking about as we move towards hopefully these next round of talks?
Well, everybody understands that the closure of Strait of Hormuz and its implications are a matter of concern for everybody, not just for Pakistan, for the entire Western world, for the United States itself in many ways, although there's a school of thought that the US is benefiting because the US will be able to sell its own oil resources, oil products to the West, and effectively downplaying the centrality of the Gulf region in this entire oil energy business. Pakistan has been doing admirably well in many ways. They managed to conduct indirect talks, basically trilateral indirect talks involving US and Iran. And the last ceasefire deal, which came at a time when the world at large was expecting the United States to strike the entire energy infrastructure of Iran, with massive implications for the entire world, because we're not talking about just the energy price there, we talk about the ecological implications. If you strike at Iran's energy infrastructure, people living in this part of the world would feel the consequences in the pure ecological sense of the word. So Pakistan did admirably well, I suppose, and the hope in the air is that they will do again admirably later on Wednesday. But the reality here is that we're talking about effectively the replication of what happened before and the continuation of the self-same procrastination. And in this procrastination, what we see, we see a ceasefire deal, interim deal, short of proper peace framework. Because if you go back to the earlier comment of yours about US sending mixed signals, I mean, one of the very good examples of that mixed signals was President Trump saying that we have a new regime in Tehran. I mean, we don't have a new regime in Tehran. No. If you talk about current administration there in Tehran as a new regime, impression may be that actually US has achieved the regime change objective, and so did Israel. But that system there is not a new system.
Equally, Orkan, you could argue the other way. You could say that it's been emboldened, that it's brought a group together, that the new supreme leader is slightly more conservative than the old one. So yet again, there's different ways of looking at the same outcome.
Absolutely. I think what the reality here is that the current system there, as you rightly said, I think is far more radical. If you listen to what people in Tehran are saying, they're not less radical than they used to be. They're even adamant, they're emboldened because, as I mentioned earlier, survival for them meant a degree of strength, power projection. They're all suffering, of course. They're all suffering the consequences of the war, and they have their lives have not become better as a result of all of this military campaign. But being the cynosure of the entire world's attention, surviving all of this process, and with IRGC and other intelligence units there doing their level best in order to create an impression that Iran is actually winning this wider global war, also, of course, naturally has some impact on the people's minds. Yes, you're absolutely right. It's very interesting that although Iran is considerably weakened in terms of its military capabilities, although Iran has absolutely no control of its airspace, with US and Israel dominating that particular sphere, although Iran's ability in terms of power projection beyond its borders has probably been limited as a result of all the campaign. There's something else there which has been strengthened, that the sense of purpose, sense of your own righteousness, and that sort of entity is far more dangerous than the previous one, because when you're pushing them into their limits, they're capable of producing venomous injections in the form of proxy wars of different type, terror plots. I mean, we know what happened. We actually remember the 6th of March report by Azerbaijan State Security Service, according to which a number of IRGC-connected people were arrested in this country, and the terrorist plot has been thwarted, and that plot was about actually attacking Israeli embassy, some Jewish sites in this country, and plus, of course, Baku-Tbilisi-Jahan an oil pipeline.
Well, let's just dive into that in a bit more detail, Okan, because Israel's issued a statement, obviously, regarding the recent attempt by the IRGC to carry out this attack in Azerbaijan. What do we know about this?
Well, we know that back in 6th of March, Azerbaijani side, the day after the Nakhchivan drone attack, published a statement. That statement was published by Azerbaijan State Security Service. According to that statement, as I mentioned earlier, I already gave you the crux of that particular statement. Number of people, 7, 8 Azerbaijani nationals, and 2 Iranian handlers were mentioned there, and those handlers were connected with a special unit of IRGC, according to that very statement. And effectively, it was a statement about a foiled terror attempt by Iran-connected intelligence forces. And this particular statement by Israeli side, which was published today on the 20th of April, it's published by Iranian Foreign Ministry, and it is regarded and widely described as a joint statement by intelligence units, including Mossad and so forth. They're effectively referring to that very event that happened on the 6th of March, and they're saying that the command mentioned there, who belongs to the, I think it's called the Unit 4000 unit of the IRGC infrastructure system, was actually exterminated as part of this current operation. Why Israelis are doing it now? That happened a long time ago. Why they are actually making a statement today, just 2 days before the deadline, basically? I think it's part of their strategy to prove to the world that Iran is deeply destabilizing actor. Iran cannot be trusted, and actually their campaign against Iran served a certain purpose of limiting potential Iranian threat. I think timing is very important. It is about the self-justification. It may also be about actually making sure that negotiations do not go the way they should go, because I don't think Israel could be deemed as interested in the possible positive outcome, because Israel wants further escalation in order to attain its objectives. And this particular moment also reveals, of course, dichotomy between Israel and United States. I think US objectives are not identical to Israeli objectives, although they are allies and partners. At moments like this, we see divergences being revealed.
Azerbaijan, obviously, like many other countries, hoping for peace and a resolution in the talks that we hope will come. What role do you think this part of the world has to play in this sort of wider dynamic as it plays out over the coming weeks?
This part of the world, as a civilized part of wider civilized world, should be interested in peace, because basically beyond the increase in oil prices as a result of the semi-blockage of the Strait of Hormuz, it's a question of major stability. On the 5th of March, this part of the world saw the spillover impact of the unfolding crisis in Iran. Negotiations and some sort of sensible compromise must be attained between the parties, because objective of crushing and forcing the collapse of Iranian state is not achievable as things stand now. grand invasion is not likely for very obvious reasons. So the part of this world could play an important role in terms of intensifying this peaceful negotiation. I don't think that Azerbaijan could play a role of a sort of a platform for Iran and Israel and Iran and US come together. That role could be played by other actors like Pakistan, and potentially Organization of Turkic States could provide such a platform. But basically, common sense is what this region should exude, and that's what should emanate from this region in this very context. Because after all, we're all interested in stability and peace. Oil prices going up in such a manner is not really within the best interest of any country in this world, apart from some external actors perhaps. And Azerbaijan's role should be one of self-interest, and that self-interest is closely aligned with the wider interests of the region, which is basically peace, stability, and a degree of predictability. Because over the past few months we have seen a number of events which we're not able to predict, and they have caused major havoc. It is a confidence, because when we earlier talked about Dubai, I mentioned about my conversation with my friends about Dubai. Dubai has been was always perceived to be very, very fragile, and building up back that reputation which Dubai enjoyed before this conference will be incredibly challenging. And let's hope that similar things will not happen in the vicinity of Iran in different parts of the world.
Absolutely. Orkan, always a pleasure to have you with us. Thank you very much indeed. Well, oil markets are reacting sharply to renewed tensions in the Gulf as uncertainty over supply and diplomacy drives volatility. With prices rebounding in global markets on the edge, the focus is on how long disruption to key energy routes could last.
Oil prices rose sharply on Monday after falling more than 9% on Friday as tensions increased over the closure of the Strait of Hormuz and renewed US-Iran accusations over a ceasefire breach. Reports say US forces seized an Iranian vessel attempting to break a blockade, while Iran said it would not join further talks with Washington, despite US pressure. The US continues to block Iranian ports, and Iran has repeatedly imposed and lifted restrictions on the Strait of Hormuz, which handles around 1/5 of global oil flows. In Asia, both Brent and WTI also surged at the market open. Markets remain focused on the blockade and uncertainty over US-Iran talks. US futures fell over 0.5%, while gold and silver also declined. European stocks opened lower, with the stock 600 down 0.8%.
Things are starting to get serious. We can manage with perhaps 2 months of a closed Strait of Hormuz, but after 3 or 4 months, things will start to get critical in terms of helium, kerosene, fuels in general, and also fertilizers. There's a stockpile in place, built up in advance because there was some anticipation that this war might break out. If it lasts too long, it will become problematic. The stock market isn't anticipating that yet, but if the collapse of the ceasefire suggests that things will escalate again, the markets are indeed unprepared for that.
Higher oil prices are also increasing pressure on European economies, especially those that rely heavily on energy imports. The Strait of Hormuz, through which around 20% of global energy flows, remains one of the main sources of tension in the region.
Investors want to put the Iran war behind them, want to look beyond these growth targets. They'll be scrutinizing the balance sheets very closely during earnings season to see how deep this downturn is. And can we really just ignore it? I think the whole thing will resolve itself through sector rotation. Investors want to stay invested, and there will be losers who are less able to adapt to situation. High energy prices, supply chain disruptions, some companies will be better able to adapt. And so investors are rotating slightly from one sector to another without this necessarily leading to a major correction at the index level.
Analysts say investors are trying to remain in the market despite the risks, with the main shifts taking place between sectors rather than across the broader indices.
Well, to understand what all this means for global energy markets and the broader economic picture, we're joined now by Ozgur Güven, sustainability and energy expert, joining us from Ankara. Mr. Güven, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Primetime. We appreciate it very much indeed. The geopolitical tension, we were talking about it with Orkan just a minute ago. It's palpable, isn't it? But you've also got energy structures that were changing anyway before this. All of that causing quite a lot of market volatility. Just from your perspective, how is all of that actually impacting markets?
Well, to start with, maybe I can give an example of my own land, like from Turkey, that every $10, a very recent study, every $10 of an increase on the oil price is adding an extra around $5 billion in our deficit. Turkey is well known in budget deficits every year, so it's just every $10 adding $5 billion of an extra deficit. It's a very hard number to maintain, to control, and I believe this has even more impact in many other countries who are wholly dependent on the oil from the region, from through Hormuz. I mean, luckily we are not. We're just being affected by the oil prices, not the resources. Fortunately, thanks to our government's policies, I mean, with Erdogan's government's policies, I can say the diversification of resources was managed in a good manner, that we don't need the oil from the Gulf. But on the other hand, the prices are the only effect that we are facing, and yet the only prices is still causing a lot of damage to manufacturing industry, to transportation costs, and more like being a farmer myself, it's affecting agriculture intensely.
Yeah, as you rightly say, oil prices remain highly sensitive, don't they, to events like what is happening in the Strait of Hormuz, like the incident that's happened recently. But how exposed is the global economy right now, really? The reason I ask this is that we hear mixed signals, don't we? We hear statements from the US saying, well, we're not going to be affected by this. If anything, it's a net gain for us. We have people in the UK saying, well, don't worry about us because we get most of our oil from Norway. Is there an overall effect that is inescapable for everybody?
I don't know who is telling that, but from my colleagues, friends, including my own brother who lives with his family in the States, they are hugely affected from it. I mean, the oil prices just going from A to B, almost like 60-70% an increase we're talking about. Like in certain cases, like doubling up. So I don't know who tells what, but I believe all over the world, everybody is affected, and especially when it comes to agriculture, as I said, like urea fertilizer is one of the biggest inputs of any farmer around the world, and not to mention like US also. And basically all over the world it's been imported, most of the time, including Turkey. And I don't think the American farmers are happy over there, or the British farmers are happy over there. I mean, I'm sure we're gonna see some episodes of the Clarkson Farm that mentioning this in the next episodes over there.
And at the same time, obviously, solar energy, renewable forms of energy are high in demand. Demand is surging. Is that significant enough? Has this crisis just come just a little bit too early for renewable energies to really take the strain and help out?
I don't think, I mean, it may, in a very limited amount, it will have a positive effect on renewable energy. Renewable energy has its own path and it's going good. But on the other hand, who is being affected from this problem? I don't think they're gonna shift from fossil fuels to renewable energy just like that. But on the other hand, I believe it has a more effect on finding alternative routes. I mean, like the Saudis are talking about Sumed, or the Egyptians are talking about, the Egyptians are talking about Sumed, and the Saudis are talking about petrol line. Whereas there was a Hijaz, the ancient, like the old Ottoman railway from the Sultan Abdulhamid, the Hijaz railway. Even these humongous projects are being discussed as we speak. I think they will have a more positive effect on these alternative routes than the renewables as we speak, I think.
And do you think that, as you say, it's quite interesting, do you think in some ways such a colossal crisis may have acted as a sort of a catalyst to push forward some of these innovations?
I think so. It will have a positive effect on that. Like, it will definitely have a positive effect on that, like to be a catalyst for those like huge projects. Some of them was never talked other than being on, you know, some newspapers or some research papers, but we actually all over the world are considering that these projects or these kind of projects are actually can happen. And hopefully maybe people after so many decades again see while pumping their gas in their, like if you're refilling their cars, they actually reconsider that, you know, it's not cheap, so they may think of passing to a renewable energy, like, I mean, like full electric, or how to lower their cost of living. I mean, sorry, how to lower their cost of transportation, or you know, I mean,
yes,
those sort of things may have an impact, positive effect on those things, I guess.
And finally, I just wanted to get your forecast, your prediction, if you like, your advice really. There are so many metrics, indicators around at the moment. It's such a complex situation, both geopolitically and economically. What should investors, government officials be looking out for over the next few days?
I believe like enough of gold, let's say. There is no more space. I believe, this is of course my personal opinion, like gold is already settled down. I believe that it will rest for a while. On the other hand, it seems this conflict will continue for a while. It's not going to end in the next days or maybe weeks, but we know that during like early summers it must stop either this way or that way. There are few elections which will be affected by this. There are some other measures that will be affected by this, but I don't think it's going to end very soon, this conflict. That's why if we are talking about investing in this or that commodities or any other alternatives, we have to keep cautious for a few more weeks, I think.
Interesting stuff indeed. Mr. Güven, we thank you very much indeed for joining us from Turkey for your analysis on Primetime tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a pleasant evening.
Okay, after the break, we'll be taking a look at the top business news stories shaping the day with Andy Mioch. Don't go away.
We are in Somalia, a place often used through the illusion of constant danger.
Somalia is already facing security threats from groups like Al-Shabaab.
Currently, Somalia has 3.4 million people internally displaced.
Mr. President, I want you to know that I'm signing now Israel's official recognition of Somaliland.
We are expecting all member states of the United Nations to recognize Somaliland.
We strongly rejected Prime Minister Netanyahu's illegal aggression in recognizing part of Somalia.
A conflict will last. People make so much money on it.
This country sits at the crossroads between instability and order, isolation and connection, risks and responsibility. Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
Warm welcome back wherever you're watching Primetime. Now, Andy Mioch is with us with the very latest business news stories of the day. Andy, what's on your agenda tonight?
Well, Guy, there is no escaping talking about oil prices, which are on the rise following that weekend flare-up in the Strait of Hormuz. The Iran war is impacting airfares in Asia as well as the electric vehicle market in Europe. There's also some news on pharma and defense stocks, so let's take a look. First up, oil prices climbed more than 5% at the start of the week as a standoff between Iran and the United States prevented tankers from using the Strait of Hormuz. The waterway was closed again after Iran reversed a decision to reopen the strait, and President Donald Trump said a U.S. Navy blockade of Iranian ports remains in effect.
Brent crude futures surged more than 5% to above $95 per barrel on Monday, reversing losses from the previous session. This comes as geopolitical tensions flared again in the Middle East. The rally followed remarks from US President Donald Trump that the US Navy fired on and seized an Iranian-flagged cargo vessel in the Gulf of Oman after it ignored orders to stop while exiting Hormuz. Tehran also targeted ships and reasserted control over the Strait of Hormuz, arguing that the US blockade on Iran-linked vessels violated the ceasefire agreement. While momentum toward a lasting peace had been building late last week, uncertainty has since resurfaced, even as Trump said US negotiators would head to Pakistan on Monday for another round of talks. The ceasefire agreement between the US and Iran is set to expire this week. The prolonged conflict has triggered a historic energy supply shock, heightening inflation risks and raising concerns over a potential global economic slowdown.
Meanwhile, the Kremlin reacted to the U.S. renewing the waiver on Russian oil, saying it was hard not to take Russia's export volumes into account. The U.S. Treasury Department on Friday renewed a waiver allowing countries to buy sanctioned Russian oil at sea for about a month.
The Kremlin, when asked on Monday about a US sanctions waiver on some Russia's oil exports, said that Russia was a responsible and important player on global energy markets, and that it was hard not to take Russia's export volumes into account. The Donald Trump administration on Friday renewed a waiver allowing countries to buy sanctioned Russian oil at sea for about a month, even as lawmakers accused the government of going easy on Moscow as its war on Ukraine grinds on. The Treasury Department's waiver lets countries purchase Russian oil and petroleum products loaded on vessels as of Friday through May 16th. It replaces a 30-day waiver that expired on April 11th and excludes transactions involving Iran, Cuba, and North Korea. The move is part of the administration's effort to control global energy prices that have shot higher during the US-Israeli war with Iran. It came after countries in Asia, suffering from the global energy shock, pressed Washington to allow alternative supplies to reach markets. Russian President Vladimir Putin's special envoy, Kirill Dmitriev, said an extension of the US waiver will affect another 100 million barrels of Russian oil, bringing the total volume affected by both waivers to 200 million barrels.
Major Asian airlines have reported surging demand on European routes as travelers shun disrupted Middle Eastern hubs in a shift analysts suggest could persist for some time, even after the Iran war ends.
Hong Kong's Cathay Pacific Airways, Singapore Airlines, Korean Airlines and Australia's Qantas Airways last week disclosed robust performances on European routes in March. That's despite grappling with a doubling in the price of jet fuel as a result of the conflict. Singapore Airlines said the percentage of seats filled on its European flights jumped to over 93% in March, up from around 80% a year earlier. Korean Air reported a 47% operating income surge in its first quarter estimated results, with European passenger revenue rising almost a fifth from last year. Meanwhile, Qantas said it had adjusted its operations to capture the shift, redeploying capacity from US and domestic routes. Cathay Pacific said the strong demand was expected to continue through April, fueled by Easter travel and increased long-haul bookings that transit in Hong Kong. Before the conflict in the Middle East, Gulf carriers Emirates, Etihad and Qatar Airways accounted for about a third of Asia-Europe traffic, according to aviation data firm Cirium. They also carried more than half of all passengers flying from Europe to Australia, New Zealand and Pacific Islands. Though the trio have been restoring operations following the initial disruption, they are still far from operating at full capacity. Bank of America analysts said that Asian carriers could see tight pricing and share gains on Asia-Europe routes persist for up to 12 months, even after war ends.
Investors have recently cooled their interest in European defense stocks. Profit-taking and stretched valuations have joined with growing uncertainty about the future of warfare. That's as the Iran war has again shown the effectiveness of low-cost drones.
MSCI's Europe Aerospace and Defence Index fell just under a tenth in March, its biggest monthly fall in 5 years. Defence stocks usually rally at the outbreak of war, but that hasn't happened since the Iran conflict began in February. Shares in Czech arms maker CSG have dropped almost a third since the conflict began, while Germany's Rheinmetall is down 10% and Sweden's Saab about 12% lower. European defence stocks have been among the market's strongest performers since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine 4 years ago. They've gone up more than 450% compared with a roughly 40% gain for the MSCI Europe Index. The rally was fueled by pledges from European governments to boost defence spending and by Germany loosening fiscal rules last year to push its rearmament drive. But order intake has been slower than some investors expected. Analysts argue contracts have faced delays or been phased due to fiscal pressures in countries like France and Britain. The Iran conflict has shown again both the cost and intensity of modern warfare. Gulf states have fired hundreds of US-made Patriot anti-missile interceptors priced at about $4 million each. The conflict has renewed focus on cheaper military solutions seen in the Ukraine war. Those include attack drones and interceptors like the Ukrainian-designed interceptor from Japan's Terra drone. Some European defence groups are investing heavily in drones, as well as surveillance and counter-drone systems. Analysts say the long-term case for European defence stocks remains solid despite the correction, especially with government spending commitments still rising and fund flows suggesting selective buying on weakness.
Sales of fully electric cars in Europe's main auto markets jumped in the first quarter of 2026 as drivers looked for alternatives to combustion engines after the war in Iran caused the highest spike in petrol prices in years.
Sales of fully electric cars in Europe's main auto markets jumped by almost a third in the first quarter of the year. Drivers looked for alternatives to combustion engines after the war in Iran caused the highest spike in petrol prices in years. New battery electric vehicle registrations, a proxy for sales, rose to almost 560,000 in the quarter and were up over 51% in March alone in 15 European markets. The data was collected by trade association e-Mobility Europe and research firm New Automotive. The joint statement from the two organisations said the 500,000 BEVs registered in the quarter were enough to reduce oil consumption by 2 million barrels per year. The region's 5 largest EV markets are Germany, France, Spain, Italy and Poland. The data showed they recorded growth of more than 40% in BEV sales so far this year.
Truly fantastic car.
And finally, in pharma news, drug maker Eli Lilly struck a deal to acquire Kelonia Therapeutics for as much as $7 billion. The move is seen as Lilly's aggressive push to expand its cancer treatment footprint beyond its dominant obesity and diabetes franchises.
US drug maker Eli Lilly has agreed to buy privately held biotech firm Kelonia Therapeutics for up to $7 billion, the company said on Monday, gaining access to experimental cancer treatments as it bolsters its oncology pipeline. Boston-based Kelonia is developing a pipeline of genetic medicines with a focus on CAR T-cell therapies, which modify a patient's immune cells to recognize specific targets and destroy cancer cells. The transaction is expected to close in the second half of 2026, subject to regulatory approvals and other customary closing conditions. Under the terms of the agreement, Kelonia shareholders will receive up to $7 billion in cash, including an upfront payment of $3.25 billion and subsequent payments upon achieving certain clinical, regulatory and commercial milestones.
Well, that's a wrap on the business brief for tonight. Hand to get back to you, Guy.
Great stuff as always, Andy. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, after the break, a political earthquake in Bulgaria as a former president secures a sweeping victory. What it could mean for Europe next. Stay with us.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. AnewZ is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on AnewZ.
We are in Somalia, a place often used through the illusion of constant danger.
Somalia is already facing security threats from groups like Al-Shabaab.
Currently, Somalia has 3.4 million people internally displaced.
Mr. President, I want you to know that I'm signing now Israel's official recognition of Somaliland.
We are expecting all member states of the United Nations to recognize Somaliland.
We strongly rejected Prime Minister Netanyahu's illegal aggression in recognizing part of Somalia.
A conflict will last. People make so much money on it.
This country sits at the crossroads between instability and order, isolation and connection, risks and responsibility. Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
Welcome to AnewZ, unfiltered news and analysis from the region and beyond. From Washington to Beijing, Tehran to Kabul, to Tbilisi to Tashkent. Hello, I'm Jay. Challenges.
Today is the third.
We're with you 24/7, taking you live to the front lines of the day's biggest stories.
Welcome to Gabala. Hi, Candy. One important note. To Fierce. I'm here.
Azerbaijan and Armenia.
Hello, we are reporting on the 8th of November.
Reporting from Paris,
Dar es Salaam, Tel Aviv,
Washington,
London,
Moscow,
Kyiv, Berlin,
Rio de Janeiro, Beijing, Bangkok, Tbilisi, Tashkent,
Almaty, Kazakhstan,
Port Sudan, Tehran, Islamabad, Istanbul,
Kabul for AnewZ.
Welcome back to Primetime. And we've seen a political earthquake in Bulgaria. Former President Rumen Radev is on course for a landslide victory in Sunday's snap parliamentary elections, with 96% of the ballots officially counted. His Progressive Bulgaria party is dominating with nearly 45% of the votes. Well, the result is set to end years of severe political deadlock. But it's raising alarms in Western capitals over the country's future trajectory. Here's our report.
The election result crushes Bulgaria's established political order. Rumen Radev's sweeping win sidelines former Prime Minister Boyko Borisov's GERB party and the Liberal coalition, both trailing far behind at around 15%. It gives Radev a clear mandate to form a government, ending a crisis that saw 8 elections in just 5 years.
You should know that Bulgaria will pay efforts to continue its European path, but believe me, strong Bulgaria in strong Europe needs critical thinking, needs pragmatism, because Europe has fallen a victim to its own ambition to be a moral leader in a world without rules.
Radev stepped down from the presidency in January to run, riding a wave of mass protests against the previous government. Now, on the streets of Sofia, voters are torn between the promise of stability and the fear of a geopolitical pivot.
I'm very anxious because he is pro-Russian, as this might be very problematic. But I suppose the people won't let him do very major change regarding the geopolitical scene.
I believe in him. I see that he's he will do, not only talk. That's the most important thing in every topic, not only in political topic.
But it is that geopolitical shift that has international observers on edge. Radev strongly opposes military aid to Ukraine and campaigned on restoring Russian energy flows to Europe. In Moscow, the Kremlin was quick to welcome the prospect of a friendly face inside the EU and NATO.
We are, of course, encouraged by the words of Mr. Radev, who won the elections, as well as those of certain other European leaders, regarding their readiness to resolve issues through a pragmatic dialogue with the Russian Federation.
While the Kremlin says it's too early to declare a broader shift in the European climate, Radev's absolute majority gives him unprecedented power to reshape the foreign policy of a key nation on NATO's southeastern flank.
Well, to unpack the implications of this result, we're joined now by Angel Petrov, journalist at Dnevnik, joining us from Sofia in Bulgaria. Thank you very much for being with us, Mr. Petrov. How significant is this result for Bulgaria's political direction, do you think?
Well, thank you for having me, first of all. I think this political result will change everything and nothing in the same time. Everything in the sense of changing the Bulgarian political establishment completely, at least for now, or we can say almost completely, because Radev, after all, we should not forget, is a part of the system. He is a systemic player because he ushered in a number of caretaker events, and as a president for nearly 2 terms, he had several political appointments that he was entitled to under his special mandate. But most of the people within the elite will be supplanted by people he has worked with, or he is more like work with now. Some of them are his years-long loyalists. So this will change for sure. The faces of the administration will change completely. On the other hand, we don't know yet if he has the expertise, he and his team, the expertise, the nerve, the gut to reform a highly personalized system that does not only depend on the name central administration, but also goes deeper into local municipalities where it still has no control, and where the older players such as GERB and the Movement for Rights and Freedoms are the kingmakers and the people distributing the resources. Until local elections come and his power is tested at the local level, we don't know how powerful he is. Of course, with such a majority, 6 months, maybe he can deliver at least part of the things that he promised to deliver, which actually torpedoed him into power.
And talk me through what did torpedo him into power, because it's an extraordinary. It looks like an extraordinary victory. What is it? Is it the man himself, the cult of personality? Is it the party, their policies? Why has Mr. Radev been so popular?
Well, first of all, he had a head start. In Bulgaria, normally, presidential institution has huge approval. Huge compared to any other institutions. The difference between Radev and his predecessors is that he managed to capitalize on that and not to waste all of this potential and transfer the approval for the presidential institution per se to his own personality. This is something new, and I think this is owed to several circumstances. One, the perpetual political crisis of the past 5 years. I say 5 because, okay, the protests were in 2020, so 6, but the first election that unlocked that triggered this political storm, with cabinet after cabinet failing to solve the issues and dissolving itself, began in 2021. Since then, many Bulgarians are tired of voting, tired of listening to promises of different political acts, and to give a chance to someone who had not been given a chance at solving the mess. This is one. Another, we can say, is the fact that he managed to fine-tune different messages to different public. He managed to convince that he could do whatever they promised to do and didn't, and just failed at. So he just managed to say different things to different people at the same time. An example would also be that the moment he announced his parliament bid, he abandoned part of his pro-Russian rhetoric, or what many people here in Bulgaria, especially his critics, would describe as pro-Russian rhetoric, to sound more West-leaning, more centrist or whatever. And even many pundits who would previously be now began saying, they switched the tune and began saying the pro-Western, pro-EU candidate at these elections. So he just managed to shapeshift whatever was more convenient for him, and just rode the wave of discontent of the previous system, and also the wave of popularity of his own, until recently, his own presidential institution.
So some pragmatism, some, as you say, ability to connect with a wide range of different people. Do you think how would you describe his position when it comes to the EU and NATO? Do you think there seems to be more nuance to it than just being anti-EU or anti-NATO?
I don't think he's anti-EU or anti-NATO. I think he is this kind of populist. He has this kind of populistic discourse that begins with, "We are not against the EU and NATO, but," and here come the variations in the but. One portion of the variations are destined only to a domestic audience, and they are tailor-made to please this part of his base, which he just stole away from Revival, that was a pro-Kremlin party mimicking and parroting Kremlin talking points, and all the parties that gravitated around it and whose voters were disappointed by Revival to him. It is this kind of base that he has to please from time to time. And this part of the messaging would be harsher. Of course, we want good relations with Russia, we want the war to be over, etc. We think that warmongers in Europe are going to the continent, whatever. This is detrimental to Bulgaria. The other portion of the discourse would be more, I think, attuned to EU public and to the EU partners. It would be closer to maybe Peter Magyar than to Robert Fico in Slovakia. And it will say Bulgaria's budget is very much worn down because of the budget was the reason that the previous government collapsed. We cannot afford to finance costly foreigners such as backing the war in Ukraine. We won't stand in the way, but Bulgaria will not give us no penny. Or another variant of this would be, we will of course help Ukraine, but we need this or that, trying to bargain his way into the deal, just as Fico is doing occasionally when he wouldn't stay with Orban. Magyar uses a similar thing. He now says, so we don't have enough money, our budget is in a desperate situation, the economy too, and we don't want Hungary to be part of ventures and to help fuel the war at its own expense. I think this will be closer to what we will hear in Europe. So he is not pro-Russian, he's opportunistic, and I think his opportunism will vary depending on who he's talking to.
And finally, what should the world expect from a Radev government? And what do you think we should be watching out for in particular over those first few weeks?
How swiftly he is going to try to solve domestic problems rather than his foreign policy rhetoric. I'm referring to, for example, to judicial reform. How swiftly he can secure a change of a complete revamp of the Supreme Judicial Council. This is the judicial watchdog of Bulgaria, whose mandate expired quite a while ago, but amid the political crisis, nobody could solve that. And if this is successful, how quickly he can secure the change of the prosecutor is one of fears, and he's also overstaying his term because of the political crisis. These demands, which have been part and parcel of his rhetoric ever since he made it into the presidency, his first term, before even we could hear any word about war in Ukraine, etc., because there was no war in Ukraine. Judicial reform, rule of law are the most essential thing in his program. And this is he's now coming full circle. After so many governments that failed to deliver on the items, he can try to do it. If he's successful, he can perhaps justify some of all the hopes that were put on him, even from people who were not typically his electorate. So I think that the speed at which he manages to work on this will be indicative of whether his government really lasts a full 4-year term.
Very interesting indeed. Mr. Petrov, we thank you for joining us and for giving us your analysis tonight on Primetime. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, after the break, global leaders wrap up 3 days of talks in Turkey with security, energy and diplomacy at the centre. Don't go away.
We are in Somalia, a place often used through the illusion of constant danger.
Somalia is already facing security threats from groups like Al-Shabaab.
Currently, Somalia has 3.4 million people internally displaced.
Mr. President, I want you to know that I'm signing now Israel's official recognition of Somaliland.
We are expecting all member states of the United Nations to recognize Somaliland.
We strongly rejected Prime Minister Netanyahu's illegal aggression in recognizing part of Somalia.
A conflict will last. People make so much money on it.
This country sits at the crossroads between instability and order, isolation and connection, risks and responsibility.
As America sleeps, Europe is waking, and the East has begun its day. AnewZ is right here at the center, bringing you the latest stories as they break. I'm Nadia Jani, here with you each weekday morning to share latest world news and the stories shaping our region. Across all platforms and wherever you get your news, we explore the context behind the big headlines. Live from Baku, I bring you a diverse mix of regional and international news, sport and politics for you, an audience that wants a bit more. So join me Monday to Friday for the latest headlines, expert analysis and live updates from around the world. Around the globe and live from Baku, this is Daybreak here on AnewZ.
Welcome back to Primetime. The Antalya Diplomacy Forum has wrapped up after 3 days of high-level diplomacy in Turkey, bringing together leaders and officials from nearly 150 countries. Regional security, energy cooperation and diplomatic mediation dominated the agenda, with Azerbaijan playing an active role in key discussions.
This year's Antalya Diplomacy Forum brought together nearly 4,700 participants from 148 countries, including dozens of heads of state and government. Azerbaijan attended with a high-level delegation led by President Ilham Aliyev, alongside Presidential Advisor Hikmet Hacıyev and Foreign Minister Ceyhun Bayramov. Much of the discussion focused on regional cooperation models, moving from bilateral ties toward broader trilateral and multilateral mechanisms shaped by regional ownership.
In our region, Turkey-Azerbaijan bilateral cooperation is an important cornerstone of the regional peace and security. And we have transformed bilateral cooperation in the trilateral model of the cooperation, and again fulfilling the full regional ownership. Here, Turkey-Azerbaijan-Georgia cooperation, or Turkey-Azerbaijan-Iranian cooperation, or we have also stretched our hand to our Central Asian brothers. Trilaterally or multilaterally, we built in a mechanism of the cooperation at a practical level. It serves the interests of the both countries. Then let me also provide you in a practical thematic areas of the regional ownership and regional cooperation. One of them is an energy security, energy cooperation.
Regional security and mediation efforts were another major focus, particularly around de-escalation involving Iran, as well as the conflicts in Gaza and Lebanon. President Aliyev also held talks with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Syria's transitional president Ahmed al-Shara, where wider regional stability and political coordination were discussed. Participants warned that further escalation involving Iran could have consequences far beyond the immediate conflict zone.
We were pushing for this war not to break out in the first place, also because Iran is a country with a population of about 85 million people, and any harm that befalls Iran from within could affect the region in general. We are pushing for a stable region and for its problems to be resolved through dialogue and diplomacy.
Energy security remained central throughout the forum, from gas exports and pipeline diplomacy to transport corridors linking the Caspian region with Europe and Asia. At the same time, European and transatlantic security issues were also raised, including Russia-West relations, sanctions, and defense policy in Europe. Russian officials used the platform to criticize Washington's approach to global energy markets and continued pressure on Russian companies.
We have a lot of disagreements with the current American administration, especially when it comes to developing matters. No sanctions have been lifted since the times of Biden. Even the diplomatic property has not been returned yet, and our companies have already come under new sanctions. That the goal is U.S. domination of world energy markets.
Delegates also discussed maritime security and the importance of keeping global trade routes open, particularly through the Strait of Hormuz. With temporary ceasefires still fragile across the region, speakers stressed that short-term truces must be turned into lasting political settlements to protect both regional stability and global supply chains.
OK, let's bring in now our very own Katie Wilson, who is just back from reporting at the forum itself. Katie, welcome back. Good to have you with us.
Thank you. Great to be here.
So now the forum's wrapped up. You were there. What are your sort of big takeaways from the event?
Yeah, so obviously this was always going to be an interesting one because it's a key year for Turkey, and I think especially as being a key player on the geopolitical stage, on the diplomatic stage. Obviously we've got COP31 coming up in Antalya, and also Turkey will be hosting the NATO summit. So I think they really wanted to showcase that this year, of their role as a mediator, as a global player. And we heard that obviously not only in terms of the war in the Middle East. The host of the conference actually said it'd be stating the obvious to say that this conference is coming in uncertain times, but we also heard it in regards to the Russia-Ukraine war. Again, Turkey is setting themselves up as a potential mediator should the leaders want to meet. So I was there for the first day of the conference. As always, we have an opening remarks from President Erdogan and the Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan. And already on the first day, there was a lot of key speakers, such as the President of Syria, Ahmed al-Shara, Ukraine's Foreign Minister, Andrei Sybiha, and we also had regional talks as well. And I think for me, that was probably the key difference between this year and last year. This year felt a lot more regional. So we heard from Kazakhstan's President Tokayev alongside Georgia's Prime Minister Hovakidze. They were talking about the theme that underpinned the whole conference, which was mapping tomorrow and managing uncertainties. Many regional leaders were sharing the stage with Global South leaders, which was quite interesting, such as the President of the DRC. And as we saw in that VT there, Hikmet Hajiev, the assistant to the President of Azerbaijan, he was doing the speaking on Azerbaijan's behalf. So President Aliyev attended, but he wasn't speaking. That was Hikmet Hajiev, and he talked on two panels on the first day alone. So one on the role of regional ownership in a transforming world, and one on the overall South Caucasus, about its role as a strategic hub in the making. So there was a lot to unpack there on just the first day alone.
Yeah, just on that second one, Katie, the panel, the South Caucasus, I think it's South Caucasus, a strategic hub in the making. Tell us about that panel and how it was received.
Yes, it was very interesting, as not only did we have sort of the expected representatives from Azerbaijan, Turkey, we had a representative from Armenia, the Deputy Foreign Minister, sharing the stage with those leaders, as well as a representative from Georgia. Now, obviously, this is the first Antalya diplomacy since the Washington Agreement, and I think that really came through. I remember last year the conversation was, are the Armenian and Azerbaijan leaders going to meet?
Of course, your second year of course.
Yeah, of course. And this year they were sharing a stage, and Armenia's Deputy Foreign Minister was actually quite humorous about it, where he said, go back a couple of years and the question would be whether, you know, they would have a fight on the stage. But here they were talking about shared goals, such as energy security, again reflecting that situation in the Middle East and the fact that the Middle Corridor has become so key, and the fact that there is conversation now about the Trip Corridor and about a shared role in terms of logistics, energy security, and other topics came up as well. Of course, Armenia's upcoming election, that was one of the topics, but also questions like EU ambitions, and that came from both the Georgian representative and the Armenian representative, which I thought was quite interesting, since Georgia's had quite a rocky relationship with the EU recently, and obviously we had the Turkish representative there, which was quite sceptical and said, you know, it's going to be a long road ahead. So it was a very interesting panel, and certainly interesting to hear from both the Azerbaijani and the Armenian leaders.
And Katie, now it's the event has concluded. What are we looking for in terms of outcomes, things that are going to emerge over the coming weeks and months ahead?
Yeah, so this forum's always quite an interesting one, is it's not one where decisions are made. We're not going to go to this forum and expect things to get signed or things to get agreed, and it's always something that I think the Turkish leadership is keen to point out, that this is a forum for dialogue and for conversations. And if we look at even just the regional situation, that is quite significant, in that if you take countries with no diplomatic relations, for a long time that was Turkey and Armenia, it's forums like that that are really key, that they can meet in more of an informal sense just to have a conversation, and often that is where we see that progress towards diplomacy, diplomatic relations. So I think the key is that conversations have been had here. And I think in terms of outcomes, we will see obviously Turkey's role within this regional bubble like emerge more as a leader. And, you know, we had the OTS, the Organisation of Turkic States, hosting their own panel. So I think we're going to see more from these regional partnerships. And it was something that both Hikmet Hajiyev and Hobikidze pointed out, that, you know, this region does intercross. You know, they've got Europe, you've got the Turkic world, and that, I think that's what's really going to emerge, and especially reflecting on the situation in the Middle East and the need for the Middle Corridor, the South Caucasus, to emerge as an alternative hub. I think that's really going to be reflected in the outcomes of this year's forum.
Yeah, very interesting indeed. Katie, always great to have you with us. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, after the break, France and Poland deepen defence ties as Europe looks to strengthen its security posture. Do stay with us.
Inside Politics delves deeply into the heart of global issues shaping our world today. Join me for your go-to source of political analysis from across the region and beyond.
On World Business, we meet the boardroom leaders making market-moving decisions. And find out how leaders are dealing with continuous technological disruption. A warm welcome back wherever you're watching Primetime. French President Emmanuel Macron and Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk are holding a defence cooperation summit in Poland. Well, the talks on Monday gave both sides an opportunity to strike partnerships in satellites and military communications and deepen their bilateral ties, which were underscored by an official treaty between the two nations signed in 2025. Ross Cullen has more.
Well, Emmanuel Macron and Donald Tusk, the French president and the Polish prime minister, speaking in a news conference on Monday in the city of Gdansk in the north of Poland, where they held their talks. Emmanuel Macron noting in his remarks the situation in the Middle East, saying that there was tension related to the ongoing situation regarding the Strait of Hormuz, which once again he called for it to be fully reopened, saying was crucial for the global economy. He asked everyone to calm down, saying that the situation must be resolved through diplomacy and through negotiation. He did also say more broadly that we believe in a Europe that protects. This was a chance for Paris and Warsaw to work on and hold discussions about the strengthening of the eastern flank of NATO, both NATO member states. And Poland is one of those nations that is an EU member state, a NATO member state, and also borders included Ukraine, like Slovakia, Hungary, and Romania. So there was discussions about military cooperation, but also energy partnerships and improved energy resilience, work on the Cold War era pipeline bringing fuel to the region. Now, this has been a relationship which has been deepening in recent years. In 2025, France and Poland signed a formal treaty of Nancy, as it was known, which officialized their bilateral relations. Then this year we have the summit, which was held on Monday in Poland between both nations, and then 2027 will be the first official year of cultural exchanges between the two sides. Ross Cullen for AnewZ in Paris.
Well, to discuss this, we're joined now by Lieutenant General Marco Serona, who's joining us from Lisbon in Portugal. General, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Primetime. We appreciate your time very much indeed. How significant are these talks then between France and Poland for the security of Europe?
Good night. Thank you. Many thanks for having me today here. So it's important for several points. The first one, I suppose, is linked to the address that President Macron did some weeks ago about the new concept or the new doctrine for the nuclear weapons that France has. Somehow he explained to extend the deterrence of nuclear weapons from France to other countries, and for that he underlined three main points. That is the pillars that are the pillars of the deterrence system, nuclear deterrence system. One is its nuclear warheads and factors, airplanes, submarines, and so on. The other one is the anti-missile, the need for an anti-missile system. The other one is a robust capability of command and control of all those things, the anti-missile system and the capabilities of nuclear attacks. And so France has the capability to have the weapons and the assets. So it's not the point. Of course, France is going to invest a lot of money in the upgrading and modernizing the systems. But the big issue is especially the anti-ballistic missile systems that Europeans does not have. So it's something that where Europe has to have a big investment. And for that, Macron at the same time addressed the need for a kind of a joint venture of European countries that want to join these deterrence layer, nuclear deterrence layer, and somehow start talkings to see how the countries can contribute to this, especially to the other two pillars, the anti-missile system and the command and control that needs to be deployed all across Europe to work, of course. These two last points is something that has been in the hands of the Americans from ever. So it's something that for an autonomous capability from the Europeans, based of course in the French nuclear sets, it's something that has to be built. And for that, we need cooperation. Of course, we know that France, as you already spoke, France and Poland have military cooperation, industrial cooperation in other assets, conventional assets, of course. But I suppose that the main focus now is to build the deterrence capability extended to Poland, because we know that Poland we have heard some voices that Poland is thinking about to have nuclear weapons in the future. So that's something that it's not France does not see that with great interest, and so the idea is to put the nuclear sets in a extended deterrence plan for European countries.
And what do you think officials make of this in Moscow and Kyiv? Because, of course, they will, like the rest of the world, they'll be watching. Do you think that this will shift anything, change any thinking in both Russia or Ukraine?
Well, for Russia for sure, because at the time when Macron addressed the new doctrine, I suppose that was Lavrov that comes to the media to say that that will be a threat to Russia. So the extent of the use of nuclear weapons from France, but not only to defend French territory, it's something that could be, and of course with radars and sensors that are going to be positioned very near the Russian border. So, and Lavrov told at the time that could be considered a threat to Russia. And so it's something but it's the idea, of course, because deterrence is for that. Deterrence is to try to convince the other side that as nuclear weapons that the deterrence policy incorporates the capability to not to do the first attack, but to respond if needed, and respond with huge nuclear capability. Not only with a second attack or a risk to destroy the missiles the nuclear missiles in the air. So that's the two points. So it's something that for Russia it's not comfortable. But that's the idea from the Europeans. It's to put pressure on Russia, not for not using or threat to use nuclear sets against Europe.
General, one of the things that Monsieur Macron has been criticised about is this sort of preference for rhetoric over direct action. When you look at this idea of closer military cooperation between the two countries, what does it actually look like in practice, in real terms, do you think?
Let's see. Poland is one of the big countries that is now the capability to produce their own armaments and equipment. So it's almost it's not autonomous in airplanes, but almost all the rest, ships, armored vehicles, missile systems. Poland is very much capable to produce, and Poland is a country from Europe that invests more in average of the internal product, as we know, more than 4%. So it's, and a lot of that money is not only, a lot of that money is to buy internally in the Polish defense industry. So it's something that, and we know that inside the European Union, the other two or three is France, of course, Germany, and Italy. Of course, the United Kingdom also, but the United Kingdom is outside the European Union, and Turkey, of course, that is a partner from NATO. But but I suppose that the main point is that Poland is very much keen to cooperate with France in producing not only military equipment, but making a kind of the nucleus of a European defense entity. So, and it's a little bit. Of course, everybody hopes that Germany can join also, and Italy, because they are and Spain a little bit also, because are the main producers, the main countries with the defense industry capability that can support European military efforts to sustain that for a period of time. Otherwise, it will be difficult, of course, without the support of the Americans. So it's a kind of it's not a new axis as we had in the past between France and Germany, but it could be seen as a defense axis in the European defense effort to build capabilities to at least to deter from an attack in the future.
And you touched on the nuclear component a few moments ago. How should we evaluate that in the context of these discussions? Is this a long-held, sincere ambition of Poland that just naturally emerged during conversation, or is it a calculated move to send a message to Mr. Putin, do you think?
No, it's a calculated message for sure. It's more than that. They see it as a need, because we know that for the time being, having big and strong military capabilities, that's something that Poland is building, and already had it. Some a strong army and the air force, of course, and navy. But Poland knows that that could not be enough to avoid an attack from Russia. And why? Because the nuclear deterrence is also it's immediately a component of the crisis, for sure. So and Poland is in the front line. So it's with the border with Belarus. It's a kind of a kid in the hands of Russia, as we know. And so Poland has the need to be capable to if Russia invades some portion of the territory of Poland, to react with conventionally, of course, but also with the need for a military capability, a nuclear capability. In this way, because deterrence. It's not. It's for a full deterrence. Not enough to have huge conventional capabilities. The nuclear capability is also important, and so because it's those two vectors or pillars. It's the only way to deter Russia from an invasion in the future. So we have to have both, and Poland know that better than anyone. Of course, France is a little bit far away from the front line, but is interested. Not other countries in Europe having nuclear weapons. So the idea is not to have a nuclear horizontal escalation with more countries having it. So France is interested to have it as the United States did it in the past, but with new conditions, of course. And Poland is very much interested in that, of course. We don't know if in the future Poland is not keen to contribute also to the European nuclear capabilities, adding to France and to others. We don't know that, but for the time being, the need that they feel is to have the extension of the deterrence of France, of course, contributing to the other factors that the system needs. Namely the anti-ballistic missile systems and the radars and the sensors that have to be in the front, of course. And the front is Poland and the Baltic states, essentially. It's that.
Lieutenant General Marco Serrona, thank you very much indeed for your analysis, for joining us tonight on Primetime. Thank you.
Okay, see.
Okay, after the break, we'll be checking in with our correspondents around the world for the very latest developments in their regions. Don't go away.